everybody's just focused right in on what we're up to talking about this one. The topic is how the absolute heals the relative. And the absolute is just another name, another descriptive term for God, all that is, Great Spirit, Allah. Pick your name, doesn't matter. It's all the same. And the question then comes, and we had a number of questions last week, what do we do about the suffering in the world? What do we do about the way the world seems to be? And that fits right in with this topic, because really, if you think about it, you know that people have been praying for peace for a very long time. People have been praying for prosperity and for healing of illness and for every imaginable good thing that there is. And so you have to say, I guess God doesn't answer all those prayers. Or you might come to a different conclusion. You might suggest that it's not up to God to fix the world, because that's really the only logical explanation. If, as we just talked about, all of those prayers have been wished for eons of time, and still the world is in a mess, what other conclusion could there be? That it's not up to God to heal the world. It's not within the job description of all that is the absolute, infinite, unconditional love to heal what seems to be amiss in the world. Otherwise, it would have been done. It clearly would have been done a very long time ago. So what's up? What is up with this? There's a metaphor that we use sometimes called seeing with the eyes of God. And what that really is a metaphor for change your perception. See things differently. Ever since we arrived on the planet, everything that we have seen, every situation that we have been in, we have compared to all of the other things that we have experienced. And that's why we call it the relative, because we see with relation to what we've seen before, what we've experienced before. We categorize it. We look at what we see, what we perceive, and we put it in a little cubbyhole. We have a label for it even. We sometimes label it good, sometimes we label it evil, sometimes we label it illness or health or whatever, but we are always seeing in relation to what we've seen before. We're always comparing. We even compare to what our mother said we should do. Did your mother ever say you should do something? I suspect that's true. I suspect that's in the nature of mothers to do that. Sometimes fathers too. So we have this enormous data bank of shoulds that we have access to. And so when we perceive something that's going on in the world, we compare it to everything we've experienced before, plus this enormous data bank of shoulds that are existing in our consciousness. And we come up with a label. And we say, well, that's good. Or we say, ew, that's terrible. That's a disaster. So we have to look at how it is that we see the world, because the only reason that the world isn't healed already is that we haven't done it. It's us. It's in our job description to heal the world. So how in the world are we going to prevent war in Africa? Well, so that gets down to the question of what is it that we're actually up to? How do we access the absolute, the infinite unconditional love in order to heal the relative? And we do that first and foremost by being tuned in to our own self. As Jeannie read this morning, how in the world can you experience the love of God if you don't know of yourself? And how in the world can you have compassion for another if you don't have compassion for yourself? So the first step in healing the world is in healing ourselves, being comfortable with who we are. You know, every once in a while, we experience this thing called anger. Don't you? Yeah, I do. Ask my bride. She does. I can get angry. And what do you do with that? Do you beat yourself up and say, oh, I'm not supposed to be angry, I'm a spiritual person? No, that's not the ticket. The ticket is to examine carefully what's going on. Because you see, anger is only fear announced. That's exactly what anger is. It's some form of fear broadcast to the world. Look at me, I'm really fearful. I just look like I'm angry. So what we do then is to examine that, to look at it, and to say, gee, here I am experiencing this anger. I wonder what it is, what fear is behind it. And you look at it. Perhaps you take it into meditation or prayer or any other of the numerous spiritual practices, and you get comfortable with the fear that you're experiencing, and you're then able to let go of it. And through this process of getting really comfortable with yourself, you can begin the process of having compassion for another. If you know your own anger, you can understand, perhaps, why it is that once upon a time, someone actually picks up a gun and does something because they're so completely lost in anger, which is really fear. And then, once you have this compassion for yourself, have experienced your own anger, experienced your own process of letting go of the anger and seeing the fear behind it, we can see differently. And we must see differently. We will never heal the world by running around and declaring, oh, that's terrible. How could that happen? How could God let that happen? Have you ever heard that expression? Some people are actually angry at God for some perceived event that took place in the world. How could that be? That's not supposed to be. If God's infinite unconditional love, why does he allow that to happen? Well, what happens in this world of duality is a function of our consciousness, our collective consciousness. And that is simply an awareness. When I say consciousness, I mean awareness of our godness. Some people are very aware of their godness, and some people haven't got a clue. And what is that but an expression of diversity? Some people get it and others don't. And our mission is not to pick up a club and beat upon the persons who haven't gotten it yet. The skillful process is to see things differently, to create an energy of unconditional love, of forgiveness, and to pick up whatever it is that's in front of us to do in a particular situation. You might be instructed by the Holy Spirit to pick up a stick and keep someone from accomplishing greater harm. That might happen. But don't ever do it out of anger. Don't ever do it because you're annoyed by what seems to be going on, what seems to be an unskillful person, an unskillful behavior that goes on in front of you. So, people often say, and it was said last week by Sarah, what do? Are we supposed to do something? And the secret, and the answer to that is, of course you are. And the question is, what do you do? And the first thing that you do is you be at peace with yourself. We sing the song every week. Let there be peace on the earth. And let it begin with me. And that's very instructive. Because there will not be peace on the earth when we, the participants on the earth, are not peaceful ourselves. We cannot have, you can't give away what you don't have. You can't teach what you don't know. And you can't describe where you haven't been. So what's up is that we have to examine ourselves, get very, very comfortable with ourselves, and then do our work. You know, the Quakers have a wonderful expression. It goes like this: when you pray, move your feet. And it's as simple as this. If there's a great disaster and a town is destroyed, see the town healed, completely rebuilt, and pick up a shovel. Yeah. Do what is appropriate to do where you are. Earlier we talked about, well, what am I supposed to do about war in Africa? It's very, very, very important that you begin with seeing peace. Not just see peace, but energize the feeling of peace. You know, some people actually love being warriors. It's exciting. You know, it gets them right up on the edge and gets their juices going. Our mission is to see and energize peace as an even more exciting proposition than the excitement of war. Those who have looked at the situation of war have aptly described it as hell, as a disaster that no good comes from. And that may well be true. But our mission is to begin the process of changing our perceptions, aligning our perceptions not with everything that we've experienced before, not with the database containing all of the shoulds, but with the absolute, with the infinite love that God is. Because that's how change happens. Change happens one consciousness at a time. And I say to you, this is a very, very powerful energy that we tap into. It is all of the power in the universe. And we have access to it because we are part of it. So what we're really talking about is learning how to let go of duality and to tune in and experience oneness. Duality is completely made up of all of the relative things in the world. The things that we look at and we categorize, and we say good, bad, or indifferent. All of that is the relative. And the only way that we get out of the relative is to align ourselves with the absolute. The absolute, God, goodness, whatever label you care to put on it, is not going to heal the world. We are one consciousness at a time. Dr. David Hawkins, in his work on human consciousness, has made a rather bold statement that says the single most important thing that any human being can ever do for the betterment of the world is to raise their own consciousness. Now that's an extraordinary statement. The single most effective thing that you can do is to become more aware of who you are. And the reason that this is so is this enormous spiritual energy that exists in the world. And if we tune in to this energy field and use it to see good, to send blessings to everyone, it creates a similar energy that gives people permission to see differently, that gives people permission to act differently. It's literally an attractor field. It's just like a magnet. It draws like energy to it, and it increases. So there's enormous possibilities for healing the world in simply raising our consciousness. And of course, you would never say to someone who seems to be experiencing an illness, wow, that's just an illusion. You must have drawn it to yourself for some reason. I mean, that's spiritual fascism. That's not. So we always, as we're driving our friend to the doctor, we see them for who they really are. We see the light that is contained within them. You know, Mother Teresa spent years and years and years helping people who were at the very lowest rung of society. Mostly they were lepers. And she gave of herself without limit. And do you think that she could have done this if she had said, oh, this is terrible, how come there's so much leprosy in the world? She would have worn herself out in 2 days' time if she hadn't had a different view. What she saw was the shining light of the soul. In her lexicon, it was the Christ within that she saw. She didn't see a leper in rags and tatters living in the gutter. She saw the Christ. And the natural outcome of what she saw was her assistance. She would help because one follows the other. When you see someone as the expression of divinity that they are, without exception, you begin the process of allowing oneness to come into your consciousness. So really what we're trying to do is to let go of our insistence on being right. You know, enormous energy is wasted by numerous people, including those in leadership roles, by insisting on, I'm right and you're wrong. We need to give that up. The most impressive thing that you could say to someone who's disagreeing with you is, you're right. It's very disarming to them as well, because they expect to be resisted. Everyone expects resistance. And if someone says, you're right, what? What'd you say? Did I hear that right? Yeah, you're right. Because given their experience, given what their mother said to them, they are perceiving what they're perceiving. So they're right in the level of the relative. They're right. One of the great teachers of the New Thought movement said this: all evil is done in the name of good. Everyone does what they think is in their and the collective best interest to do. They just simply don't have a clue. And the effective, skillful way to deal with clueless people is not to beat them up, not to call them names, but to say, maybe to yourself, I see the Christ within you, I bless it, and I invite you into an awareness of who you really are. Now those words might not be too terribly effective in some situations. So like I said, you might say them to yourself, but this power that we have, each of us is a powerful spiritual being. And what we're up to, this whole process of being here on the planet, is the process of spiritual growth. It's in the name of the organization. And what that really is becoming aware of our relationship to the Absolute. And it is our relationship to the Absolute that will heal the relative. Because the relative is simply the mass collection of our judgments and our own perceptions. So that's what has to be healed. Until we choose to see things differently, things won't be different. All persons, everywhere, are experiences that God is having of itself. So what we're up to is to see that for what it is, the absolute truth. And when we can adopt the absolute into our consciousness and begin the process of letting go of duality and judgment and all of the things that make up duality, then we will heal the world. And the world will never be the same because we have raised our awareness of who we are, and we have invited the world to see itself differently. And it's the most powerful force in the world. So I invite you to join in the great crusade of seeing the power of the Absolute.